How do you see digital innovation acting both as an opportunity and a disruption for AEC firms today?
The opportunity, I think, for digital is a couple of fold. There's digital delivery. So how do we get better at, more efficient at, higher quality production of the work that we do today, the engineering work that we've done for years, right? How do we make a bridge, but use technology to do the calculations and the documentation more effectively? Then the other component is how do we change the relationship we have with our clients leveraging technology? And that was back to the conversation we just had about lighting. How do we create something where we're helping them create more value for their portfolio to operate their facility, their asset, their road, whatever it would be? The opportunity that digital gives us is we can share.
What if digital innovation in AEC isn't just about new tools, but also about how we lead? In this episode, we're joined by Wratten, who is a PMP Executive Director, U.S. Digital Lead, and Global Smart Places Lead at WSP in the U.S. He'll be talking to us about how innovation is reshaping the way that engineering leaders think, collaborate, and deliver real value, such as how to lead through disruption with confidence, support teams through digital change, and scale smart solutions that actually stick. If you're at the intersection of technology and leadership, or would like to be, this conversation is packed with insights that you'll be able to apply right away. But before we jump in, I wanted to tell you all about our AEC PM Connect event, where emerging and experienced leaders can learn about real-world strategies to drive performance, empower teams, and lead with purpose. Visit aecpmconnect.com to register today. We currently have events in Kansas City and New Jersey, with more coming up. I'm your host, Rebecca Swaby, and this is the AEC Leadership Podcast, previously the Engineering Career Coach Podcast. And with that, let's jump right in. So, Jay, can you tell us a bit about yourself and your path that led you to your current role at WSP?
Absolutely. And thank you for having me today. It's good to be here. I started with WSP in 2006. I have a degree in architectural engineering, which broadly means in school, they teach you two things. What are buildings for? How do we make them great for people? The design aspect, the interaction aspect, but also what's behind the walls, the structures, the systems. So I came in with a degree of that, but I've always been fascinated by the creative side. And I joined the firm WSP in 2006, as I said, as a lighting designer. So my background is in lighting. Spent about a decade working in the lighting team. Got to work on some really cool projects, stadiums being kind of the highlight. Worked on Raiders Stadium, Atlanta Falcons Stadium. We're currently working on A's in Vegas. And one of the things that was interesting to me as the market changed, lighting when I joined the firm was analog. Incandescent lights, fluorescent lights, switches, right, and so forth. Mid-teens, it turned into LEDs, and those LEDs were all digital, right? So the hardware we were putting in was increasingly technology-driven. They started having sensors on them. They started being connected. And I started to think, how do we design the digital space that we're creating in these buildings in parallel with the physical space? And what is that kind of digital footprint that the buildings we create produces, and how do we manage that to create a better experience, to create better outcomes, sustainability, user experience, and so forth? And that kind of led me to where I am now, asking questions about how can we do better? How do we leverage technology? And, ultimately now I'm in a role of trying to help the business change, more broadly. How do we solve bigger problems for our clients using tech? And
Oh, that's fascinating. What a cool story. And, starting to ask that question about the digital design of the space, did you get the opportunity to start to move in that direction on projects? Were there any notable projects where the client was really excited or motivated to go in that direction with you and adopt new ways of doing things?
So it started out of lighting, right? As I said, my background being lighting, we started to ask questions on our projects about how we could use that information for more value. And the first use case, which would typically be what we call it, was how do we take occupancy data? So in any building system, there's an occupancy sensor. You're familiar with it because it turns the lights out when you leave, or maybe turns them on when you come in. How do we take that information and use it for another purpose? And the purpose that we initially identified was real estate. What if we could tell you how frequently all the offices in your office were used? Then you could hypothetically have a better sense of whether you had enough space for all your people. Maybe you've got too much real estate and so forth. The change happened when we started to pitch that idea first instead of lighting first. And we had a client, it was a tech client in the Bay Area that was building out their headquarters. And we actually got hired as an innovation consultant, not a lighting design consultant. We were already doing the lighting separately. And that was what really springboarded us into being able to start to ask interesting questions, and me personally about challenging myself to say, how could you use technology differently? And right around then is when what became called smart buildings started to be more in vogue. And this idea that what if all of it was intentional, not just the lighting, but all the systems. And we started to sell more smart buildings work than the stuff I was doing before. And then suddenly I was doing different work. And we were doing, I think more interestingly, we were in a different position with the client, which was probably the most fascinating piece. When you switch from being a lighting designer, you work for the architect and you're a sub-consultant and you're there to support space making. But when you work for the owner as an innovation consultant, you're much more closely tied to how does their business perform? How does their real estate perform? And that changed our position significantly.
It sounds like it gave you a much broader mandate to look at things more holistically.
Absolutely. It completely changed our permission to ask questions about lots of stuff. I remember being in a meeting with a client when we asked them about, I want to say it was badge data, right? When you go into a office building, you typically badge in, badge out. And one of the people on the client side said, we don't understand why you need this information. Why, this is kind of confidential. This is secure. What value does it give you to know this about us? And that was the license, the permission that you talk about. I said, well, if we can't solve your problem with occupancy data, back to my example, maybe we could look at your badge data to inform real estate strategy. And completely changed our position, completely changed, I think, the relationship from transactional consultant to maybe more of a trusted advisor.
How has the shift from more analog systems to smart buildings, you were talking about the people side of it and the structural side of it. How has this shift benefited people? Can you maybe highlight like one or two things that have come out of this transition in the last decade?
Sure. I think, and I'll frame your question, I could frame it two ways, but I'm going to frame it around the people that are in and around our built environment, not the designers of it, but the users, right? I think that's probably more important.
Yes, that's where I was coming from. Yeah, the users of the space.
I'll give an example that I think probably affects all of us, and that's when you go through an airport. Historically, you were following the fixed signage on the walls, right? And you were trying to find your gate, so on and so forth. Think about how data dependent that journey has become for you. Where is the shortest line for TSA? How far is it to my gate? Where am I on the map? Imagine all the blue dot, when you see you as like a little blue dot. But maybe most specifically, the thing that I think is interesting happening in airports is you can order food from your gate or from your seat in many airports. I was flying through Newark the other day, QR code on the little island right next to my gate. I click it, say I want a hamburger gets delivered to the gate. I never had to go stand in line. That's all what I would consider smart building technology. How are we leveraging the digital footprint of the building to make experience better?
Okay, wonderful. And I just have to ask, because you brought up stadiums, what's stadium design like? What do you love about it? What are some of the challenges?
Well, the funnest thing about stadiums is it's one of the areas that we get to see our own work on TV. Being able to sit there watching the Super Bowl and point out to your kid, I helped create that is really exciting. And I think the stadiums for big football teams or baseball teams are really important cultural landmarks for a city. So there's an element of giving back that I think is fun. The other thing that's probably exciting about stadiums is people are there to have fun. But a lot of the facilities, that I've worked on over my career, office buildings, hospitals, right? You're there, but it's really not for entertainment. And stadiums are about having fun. It means you have a little bit more opportunity to play. With the design, you're trying to create experiences. And the thing that's also fascinating from an engineering perspective is they're huge, complicated facilities. I remember being on the catwalk in Falcon Stadium and you're 270 feet above the field or something, you're really high in the air, and just organizing all the logistics of how will you maintain those things, the calculations behind it. You really get to flex your engineering muscle as well.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing. How do you see digital innovation acting both as an opportunity and a disruption for AEC firms today?
That's a great question. The opportunity, I think, for digital is a couple of fold. Within WSP, we've tried to categorize it a little bit. I think a lot of firms do this similarly. It helps me to mentally break down things. There's digital delivery. So how do we get better at, more efficient at, higher quality production of the work that we do today, the engineering work that we've done for years, right? How do we make a bridge, but use technology to to do the calculations and the documentation more effectively. Then the other component is how do we change the relationship we have with our clients leveraging technology? And that was back to the conversation we just had about lighting. How do we create something where we're helping them create more value for their portfolio to operate their facility, their asset, their road, whatever it would be? The opportunity that digital gives us is we can shift our relationship with the client using technology. We can tell them what that data means, and we can apply our domain expertise to it. And that's a really valuable opportunity for all AEC firms. The flip side is it challenges our business model. Most AEC firms sell time. That is the primary mechanism by which we get paid. And in digital, we are less likely to sell time because the big opportunity is we're saving lots of time. So how do we rethink our business model? How do we talk to our clients and work with them about what a fair exchange looks like? Because we have to get enough money to cover our cost, right, to exist and to invest, and they need to create enough value from the results they're getting. So the disruption, I think, is that challenge to the business model.
Strong leadership drives strong projects. Become an AEC PM professional and give your team the leadership skills they need to thrive. Customized PM development, premium content, and a leadership edge that sets you apart. Learn more at aecpm.com.
So interesting, and it's something that's come up over and over again on this podcast with leaders that we've spoken to. I'd love to hear about some of those conversations that you're having with your clients, and especially the ones that are more open to innovating ways of pricing the service work. And maybe if you could talk about the spectrum, what you sort of found on the clients that are more willing to go with you there, and then where you found challenges.
Obviously, we're looking for clients that are more willing to go with us on a journey. I think we see in some markets early adopters where they recognize the value of technology. One of the great things about the role I'm in now, and what excites me about the role I'm in now, is I started by talking about my background and my history in lighting. But WSP does a lot of things. And because of my role in leading us across the U.S. business, I get a chance to see all the different markets that we're working in, from environmental remediation to mining to airports that we talked about before to roadway design. So I think there are some clients, private sector clients probably being the earliest adopters that are willing to take some risks and move with you. We mentioned before smart buildings. 10 years ago, tech companies were certainly willing to take a risk and open to a different business model. They're less hindered by procurement streams. They're not government procurements, right? So you can talk to them about, hey, what if we moved our model from an hourly fee to a lump sum fee, right? Where we're incentivized to create more efficiencies and you're incentivized because we can deliver quicker and so forth. The other area where I think clients are opening up are, is there a retainer model where the value they get from a firm looking at their data and saying what it means is paid for on a monthly recurring fee, like a SaaS model, software as a service model. Where I think the market's going to go with those more open-minded clients is a value-priced model where if we can agree on what is the value we're creating and there's some sort of revenue share between us and them. They get 9, we get 1, parts of 10 where value is created. And that could be back to my example about real estate efficiency. Where I think we see headwind are clients that are used to paying for hourly services with a fixed margin. And that's a lot of government sector clients, transportation clients, public sector clients are used to having consulting rates. You can even see in some of our client organizations, the procurement work streams are very different. Engineering is procured through this procurement stream. Technology is procured through a different work stream. And where I think we're seeing challenges is how do we sell technology as an engineering consultant? And should we actually be looking at those other procurement models?
Oh, that's so fascinating. And especially on the public side of things, do you find that leaders at WSP or other companies are trying to get in there and provide education about why these changes are necessary? Or do you find that the leaders on the public side are seeing it themselves too and starting to prepare? It just takes longer.
I think it's always good to have an open dialogue with your client about where you think your value is and how do you think where do you see the challenges? Our clients are equally aligned, I think, around the value creation. Sometimes they're frustrated by their own procurement policies. And we just have to collaborate together to figure out the right way through that. I think it is important for the AEC industry to educate our clients and for leaders to educate our clients and to have that open dialogue. Anytime you can explain your position, I think you're stronger with the client because they understand kind of where you're coming from. Back to my point before about just having a purely transactional relationship. At that point, you sort of lost. So yeah, I think clients are open to it, open to a discussion around how do we do things differently. Some of them can move faster than others. And as I said earlier, I think private sector has that first mover advantage, a little bit less governance. Public sector is going to take time. But I do see shifts. We do see different procurements coming out. I'm a big fan of the value pricing model. It's hard sometimes to put value on the price, but I think that's where we'll end up.
That's interesting. And thinking about the employees of the company for a minute, do you think that these shifts in pricing models and revenue models have a potentially positive impact on employees as well?
I think that our employees are primarily focused on, most of our employees are focused on how do we serve the client? How do we create the best outcome on the project for the client? How we price our work, what our margins are, what our utilization targets are. In many cases, I think that's a distraction for the core mission that our clients and our employees are working towards. That being said, I do see kind of two elements of sentiment coming from from the employees that work with our clients. Number one is a little bit of fear. Technology is a disruption for the way they've always worked. And I think it means that you have to learn new tools. It means that maybe the job that you were doing before that took 100 hours only takes 10 hours. And so there's sometimes a little bit of anxiety around, well, if my workflow got 10 times faster, does the company need me? Does my value still exist? Where I think our employees and how I try to encourage my employees to look is, what's the opportunity created here? If a task that was menial is now quicker, how can we use that extra time to create more value for the client? How do we spend more time analyzing, creating better decisions, better quality, whatever that workflow might be? And it's an opportunity for employees to upskill. I think anybody that sits still probably in any industry, but certainly in the AEC industry, which is kind of moving along with technology, is going to fall behind. So how do you use this as an opportunity to increase your abilities, your skills? We see a lot of that with AI right now. All of us, nobody went to college and learned how to be a good AI prompter. And so we're all learning that together, which is exciting.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And maybe that's a good transition to this next question, which is, what are some of the most common challenges you're facing when helping engineering teams adopt a digital mindset?
I think there's a couple of big ones that I see from teams. Number one, at its heart, engineers avoid risk, particularly in the industry that I work in. The buildings we build, the bridges we build, there's real risk. There's real harm that could happen if we make a decision that is wrong, right? So number one, we are trained to avoid risk as engineers. And sometimes digital feels like risk because maybe you don't understand how it works. It's a black box. So you can't necessarily defend every choice that a digital tool might be making. And so I think engineers try to get to a point where they're sure and comfortable that the answer that they're getting out of a tool is accurate and can be relied upon. So that's number one. Number two, as we try to sell more digital solutions to our clients, it requires us to be kind of salesmen for what is the value. And a lot of engineers are not good salespeople, particularly when it comes to selling something they're uncomfortable with. So getting more comfortable talking about opportunity and possibility and asking questions is something that I need to encourage my teams to get comfortable with that uncomfortableness, if I can say it that way. And then lastly, I said before that the disruption to the business model is real. So the way that a lot of engineering firms, AEC firms in general, plan and manage production is based on utilization, is based on time. And that's a headwind for people where you see these big jumps in efficiency. Just to get your head around, well, how would we price this project, as an example? Are we going to assume that we see the 10x increase in efficiency, or are we going to assume that we're doing it the old way? And what are the risks of either? Because if you assume you're going to see the efficiency and you don't, right, then maybe you let the client down, maybe you don't hit the schedule, whatever it would be.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting that sort of it all comes to head in how you price it, right? The value, understanding really the value that you're delivering and how you're pricing it, what efficiency gains you're going to experience through the project. It's all sort of reflected in how you're thinking about pricing it. Whereas perhaps before it's just straight hours, right? And now we're thinking about things in a totally different way.
100%.
So when your team members are uncomfortable, how do you support them through that? How do you support the discomfort of change?
I think the first place I try to start from is being a good listener. I think teams don't want to be told how to do their work. They want to their voice. They want their opinion to be heard, and they want to be part of the process. So, number one, it starts with listening, making sure that I understand, what are our team's current processes and workflows, and I can ask questions about maybe where we could do something better, or maybe I've seen a partnership in another part of the business that worked really well, so I can bring an idea to them and say, what about this? So, number one, start by listening. Number two, gain credibility with that team. I need to be there to support them when they need me. And if I'm not, then they're not going to be particularly receptive when I come in with an idea that looks like change or disruption to their business, right? So you kind of build that credibility. And then lastly, figure out how to experiment together. I think where we're trying to adopt a new technology, it's unrealistic for us to hold our employees to the same level of accountability in terms of sticking the landing every time when you know that you're trying something new. So how do I create a space where there's an opportunity to fail, where there's an acknowledgement that we're trying something new and that we're learning together instead of, getting all worked up about the first thing that we tried didn't work. So maybe those three things: listen well to what our teams are going through. Two, try to build credibility and trust with them by being there when they need me. And then number three, let's experiment together and sort of show that we're in this together, as opposed to pushing change on teams.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. It's not something that we're very comfortable with as engineers, is thinking about failing, possibly even on purpose, when we try something new.
Yes. Yeah. The whole fast fail mentality that you see a lot of technology companies adopt is not necessarily an engineering mindset.
Exactly. I was just thinking, you must have some team members who are naturally bringing new ideas and innovations to the surface as well, too. Is that something that you see this going both ways, from the top, but also bubbling up from the bottom, too?
I don't even know that I would say both ways. I think that we get most of the ideas from the teams, from the staff, for a couple of reasons. One, they're out there at the edge of the business working with the clients. So they're in a position to really understand, what is that pain point? What is that really hard, really expensive challenge that the client has that we might be able to help with? And then they come up with, engineers are problem solvers. So they'll come up with an idea. The hard part is, how do we get all those insights back to a place where we can look for the themes across the business and make a decision about what's the strategic impact here? What's the play that we need to make? Somebody in our firm told me the other day that there's a pandemic of project level thinking in engineering firms. We work on projects and we solve problems one at a time. I've joked before that, AEC firms can be run by Excel files on C drives because everybody has their own little tweak of how have they solved this problem. So the challenge is, how do you understand what that surface area looks like of innovation happening in all these projects, and then elevate up the really great ideas? Where do we make an investment? Where do we make a key hire that could take these ideas to the next level? That's where I think the challenge is. And I think the role of leadership is to provide that mechanism to hear what's happening in the business and then make a decision on where we're going to invest and move quickly.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. There's almost like a middle level of innovation around how you consolidate and aggregate and distill insights before you can even do anything, which makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, I like to think of these sort of meta problems that our teams have. How do you identify the meta problem? Every time we try to extract information from a site sensor that's measuring whatever it would be, air quality, noise, water levels, impurities in the environment, that is a consistent problem across lots of our domains, even though it feels very specific to each team. Because the architecture, the software architecture of how do you pull data back, how do you store it, how do you structure it, how do you analyze it, those footprints could be applied across many parts of our business. So a place where I'm in a position to help is to say, hey, a team solves a problem just like the problem you're solving in a different market, and we have a template for how that was solved. Try this, right? And give them a leg up.
Wonderful. Okay, so from your experience, what strategies and collaborations, whether with internal teams or tech partners, have helped you deliver greater client value through smart place solutions?
I think one of the areas that I think we've created a lot of opportunity is in partnering with technology providers. I was talking before about how engineers are good problem solvers. That's a double-edged sword because sometimes they're solving the problem beyond what their core competency is. So an area where we've created value is to say, how do we bring a technology partner in as a true partner that knows this space, understands the digital side? How do we manage the information? How do we build a solution architecture? How do we leverage cloud? How do we leverage artificial intelligence? Those are not AEC firms, subject matter experts. We're not out there hiring gobs of software engineers and data scientists and cloud architects. We're hiring civil engineers and geologists and mechanical engineers and so forth. So number one, bring in partners and know kind of your area of expertise. So our approach is founded on the premise that the partnership will help us drive more value for our clients. We bring the domain expertise. We know what the data and principle says. We don't bring the technology expertise, and that's where the partnering helps.
So you focus on your core competency and then get the experts to supplement. They've done it, hundreds of times before. They can really add the right fuel power to the project, it sounds like.
And I think one of the challenges for us there is to shift the way we see those technology partners. Historically, that was much more of a transactional relationship. We bought software, right? We were talking beforehand about the big names in the industry: Trimble, Bentley, Autodesk, Esri. You could view those as transactional relationships where we buy software licenses. But how do we shift that and say, hey, technology partner, let's really lean in and say partner. What if we went and solved this problem together? Because a lot of the most interesting stuff is happening out there at the sort of leading edge or bleeding edge of innovation. And they haven't figured it out yet either. They need us as much as we need them. And I think coming to that, like as open partners, is a much more successful way to create value. And you asked about smart places. That's exactly where I think we're going to create the most value, is that as I spoke about at the start of this, I started to ask questions about how do we design the digital footprint of buildings. Well, buildings don't start to create that digital footprint until they operate, until they're turned on, right? And then the data starts to be created. Historically, consulting firms are out of the game at that point. We've gone on to the next, new building, new stadium, whatever it would be. If we can create partnerships that allow us to stay with those facilities longer, look at the information, analyze it. Is it performing like we thought it would? Are we creating the user experiences we wanted? And then what tweaks would we make? I think that's where we'll create value for everybody.
Yeah, then it's more of like a flywheel system, right? You're getting the feedback, you're improving every single time because you have the information flowing. It's not just one and done. So that makes a ton of sense.
I read, I won't get the quote exactly right, but I read a quote that this is for private residents, that architects don't like to go back to their projects because the owner never puts the kitchen table where they're supposed to, right? And this idea that like you're designing this building as a one and done, that's not the case, right? Obviously, buildings have a life, cities have a life, infrastructure has a life. And the thing that keeps me really excited about this is technology is giving us an opportunity to be part of that life cycle where, for a lot of my career, we were always front end. We were always design and construction.
Yeah, and it gives you the opportunity to have more of a positive framing around going back, right? It's like we thought it was going to be used this way. Look at how it's going to be used. And there can be a positive framework around that to say like, hey, we're actually going to take that information and do something with it. It's not just a mistake or a change, for example.
We had a project, one of our early projects in this space, where the client was building out space phase by phase and moving their employees into the facility as it came online. And as they built out the first 6, 9, 12 floors, there's a high rise, they noticed that their employees were not using some of the rooms the way they thought they were. And that was by looking at the information, the data, the sensors that I talked about before. And that caused them to make a change to the design because they didn't want to have those rooms underutilized that they were going to be building out in the remaining floors. So there was a fast pivot there to say, how do we change the approach for these rooms to make them more useful for us as a business and for our employees?
Oh, that's fascinating. Thanks for sharing that. And I'd love to hear if there's any more real world roadblocks that you can highlight that you've encountered when implementing digital strategy in AEC. How did you come across them and how did you navigate them?
Well, one of the roadblocks is, I mentioned before that AEC industry typically focuses on the upfront design and construction. I always joke, like, our guys get excited about yellow trucks. Like, if they're going to build something, we're excited. If you think about how that works out in a client organization, we are predominantly, historically, interfacing with facilities design and construction or major projects. So these are capital funded projects, whether it's a new road or a new building or whatever it would be. There's a capital allocation for that project. It has a fixed timeline, has a fixed budget, so on and so forth. That means that we know those people in the business. Those are the people we've called on historically. When we talk about operational efficiency, that's an OpEx, right? You've moved from CapEx to OpEx. That is typically a different part of the client organization and one that we might not have the same relationship with. So one of the challenges is, how do we navigate how our clients are organized, thinking about the different pots of money that we might be pulling from, and make sure that the value proposition is being told to the person who is actually paying. So if we were to go in, for example, and pitch a client on, look at how we're going to save you all this money in the next 5 years, 10 years of operating this facility. That's great, but if the person that you're pitching it to sees it as an increase to their capital project that they don't have the funding for, that they're also not going to see the value from because they're not going to run the building, they're just there to build it, you've pitched to the wrong person. So one of the challenges is understand the value proposition that you're bringing to the client and make sure that who you're pitching it to sees that value proposition in their organization. You can understand that, like, at a high level, everyone wants to help their organization. I want to help WSP. They want to help their client organization. But the realities of your org chart sometimes affect decision-making in a negative way. So that's a challenge for us to make sure we know who we're pitching to. The other challenge that I might just raise is technology moves quickly, right? There's heaps of articles out there about how slow the construction industry is to pick up innovation, or how construction efficiency has remained roughly unchanged for the last 50, 60, 70 years. We did a project where we recommended a technology solution. We went through, client engagement. We understood what their pain points were. We knew what features were required, and we went out to the market and we said, this is the best solution for you, and this is why. They agreed. We started to go down the path of implementing it. Halfway through that path, that firm got acquired. Imagine the disruption that makes to a construction project, let alone a construction project, but also that building's going to be run for the next 30, 40, 50 years, and you've put technology into the building.
Right.
So another area where we need to navigate client expectation is, one, technology changes. Two, you should expect it to change, and what is your plan when it does? And how do we align a 5-year tech refresh cycle with a 30 or a 50-year building life cycle, or road life cycle, or bridge life cycle? So this misalignment in kind of horizons and change, I think, is an area where we need to be really good at managing stakeholder expectation, because I've said to clients before, it's reasonable that at some point during this construction project, some of the solutions that we've picked will no longer be on the market, or they'll be acquired, or there'll be a change in the technology that makes us need to pivot.
Yeah, so we're really used to these long cycles when it comes to physical infrastructure, but digital infrastructure, we need to be thinking about the same cycles, but just much quicker.
Right.
Depending on what it is, of course. Okay, great. Just couple more questions here. I was curious what personal habits or routines you use to help stay grounded during periods of uncertainty or rapid transformation, which obviously is very much required when it comes to the digital.
Yeah. Well, I suppose I'll start by saying it is a really exciting ride to work for a firm like WSP because we are so acquisitive, so we're so focused on growth. And so part of you just gets used to change. Me and lots of other people that have been at this firm for a while have a stack of old business cards, old logos, old titles, right? So being comfortable with change is like a place to start. In terms of habits and routine, number one, I like in the morning to spend a fair amount of time just reading what's out there in the digital or the technology landscape. And I try to be intentional about getting out of our field because I get some of my best ideas and my best insights from looking at what other industries might be looking at, whether it's industrial production or it's hospitality or whatever it would be. So number one is a habit. I try to be an open-minded learner early in the morning, typically over breakfast, just to understand kind of what's out there. There's a couple of podcasts over the years that I've also enjoyed because it's important for me to kind of understand the broader tech landscape. I follow the FANG companies or whatever the acronym is today, Meta, Facebook, Apple, Google, Microsoft, and so forth. Where are they headed? What is their strategy? I remember 6 months ago, what is agentic AI? What do people even mean when they say that? Because at some point, a few months down the road, that's going to come into our industry. And by having that habit of kind of seeing what's out there, I'm better prepared to answer the question from my executive colleagues and say, what does this mean for us? Right. And I don't find myself on the back foot. Like, I don't know. I've never even heard of that.
Yeah. Catching up.
Nobody wants to be in that. And then you're sort of speed reading on your phone during the meeting, trying to catch up on what it is. Right. So
right.
Being inquisitive and looking out at the rest of the world and the rest of the industries. And I try to do that, as I said before, in the morning, because I'm a morning person. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of when my mind works.
Yeah, same. That's when I'm listening to all the other podcasts as well, too. So if you want to share the podcast with our listeners, we can exchange them after and drop them into the show notes in case people are interested in what you're listening to.
Okay. Yeah, definitely. The one that I'm liking right now is called BG2.
Okay, great.
The letters B, G, and 2. Mm-hmm. And it's broadly about artificial intelligence and data centers and tariffs. They talk a lot about Asia versus America and how the different countries approach technology and innovation. That's been a pretty good one.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm happy to share a few of them.
Yeah, thanks for the recommendations.
The only other piece I'll make, you asked about habits. For me, I do a lot of like mental digestion when I'm working out, when I'm physically active. So I also try to find some time every day to just unplug from tech, do something hard and physical, and let that all just kind of marinate in there. And I've talking to other people, I think this is common among people when they work out, is I've had to pull over on the side of the road on a bike ride and write an idea down on my phone because I know that I'll forget maybe by the time I get home. But that's when everything sort of clicks for me.
Very cool.
So my encouragement for listeners would be, know what works for you, but find that time to ingest new information and ideas, and then find that time to kind of percolate and digest it, make sense of it.
Yeah, those two things work together really well. Consuming and then doing something physical, letting it digest. Great advice. And last question, what's one leadership lesson you've learned that you wish that you knew earlier?
I had the impression early in my career that the people above me in the organization had figured it out. And I remember I was talking with a colleague of mine who had just been promoted from one level to the next level. And that meant they went to the meeting that we weren't in before, right? We weren't in the management meeting, and now that person was in the management meeting. And I was having lunch with them afterward, and they said, you know what? They're still trying to figure it out in there too. They don't have all the ideas. They don't have it figured out. And I think the lesson I took from that I wished I'd known from the beginning is that we are all on the same journey, that none of us has got it, air quotes, figured out. And we need to be good at asking questions. We need to be good at challenging ourselves and each other in a healthy way and figuring out together and sort of acknowledging that we're learning as we go along. And there isn't, I don't think there's going to be a point in my career, I certainly hope there isn't, when the door opens and I go into the room where everything is figured out.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Okay. So don't hold yourself back from going in the room just because you think that you need to learn everything first.
Yeah. And I think maybe the corollary to that is sometimes it's better to ask forgiveness than permission. If you're waiting for someone to tell you it's okay, they've given you the trust, the rope to run. And as long as you're keeping them aware of what you're doing, for the most part, I found that people are very willing for you to be entrepreneurial and figure things out. As long as you've got that right set of oversight to make sure that you're managing your risk, whatever that might be. That entrepreneurial spirit, I think, is one of the great things about the AEC industry. There's a ton of it. There's a ton of mom and pop, startup, small companies that are just really agile and really innovative, and those are the firms that succeed.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Jay, for being with us here today. This has been a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
Please remember you can find the show notes for this episode at aecleadershippodcast.com. There you'll find a summary of the key points discussed in today's episode, as well as any links to any of the resources, websites, or books mentioned during the podcast.